Julius Caesar woke up on the morning of March 15th, 44 BC, and did something completely ordinary. He ate breakfast. He spoke to his wife. He reviewed the day's schedule with his secretary. He put on his toga, the one with the purple border that marked him as dictator of Rome, and he prepared to walk through the city he had spent his entire life conquering. It was a morning like 100 mornings before it, except that before the sun reached its highest point in the sky, Julius Caesar would be dead. And the city he loved, this city of marble and blood and a million shouting voices, would never be the same again. But here's the question that has haunted historians for 2,000 years. Did Caesar know? He had been warned. Repeatedly, specifically. A soothsayer had told him to beware this exact day. His wife had dreamed of his murder. And on the morning of the Ides of March, as he prepared to leave his house, she grabbed his arm and begged him not to go. Julius Caesar looked at her, smiled, and walked out the door anyway. Why? What did he know? What was he willing to risk? And what was this city, this extraordinary, violent, and magnificent city that made a man like Caesar believe he was untouchable inside it? That is what we are going to find out today. Before we follow Caesar through his final morning, we need to understand something that most people get wrong about Rome. We imagine it as a city of monuments, clean marble, togas, dignified senators making grand speeches. The real Rome was nothing like that. So what was it actually like to live here? Rome in 44 BC was home to approximately 1 million people, crammed onto a set of hills surrounded by marshland. It was loud, it was filthy, it was dangerous, and it was electric, with a kind of energy that no city before it had ever generated. The streets were so narrow and so congested that Julius Caesar himself had banned wheeled traffic inside the city during daylight hours, which meant that at night, every night, Rome transformed into a roaring maze of carts and wagons, delivering the food and goods that kept 1 million people alive. This is the city we are rebuilding today. Not the postcard, the real thing. And to understand what happened on March 15th, 44 BC, we need to walk the same streets Caesar walked. Starting from the very beginning, Julius Caesar was born in 100 BC in a neighborhood called the Suburra, and that single fact tells you almost everything you need to know about how he saw himself and how he wanted Rome to see him. The Suburra was not where powerful Roman families lived. It was the opposite. 6-story apartment buildings called insulae rose on both sides of streets, so narrow that neighbors on opposite sides could almost reach across and touch. The ground floors were taverns and workshops. Above them, families of 5 and 6 crammed into single rooms with no running water, no kitchens, and no way out if the building caught fire, which they did constantly. So why would a man from one of Rome's oldest patrician families choose to stay here, long after he could afford to leave? Because Caesar understood something that the old aristocracy of Rome never quite grasped. The people of the Suburra were the real Rome. They were the voters, the soldiers, the muscle of a republic that the Senate ran, but the streets powered. Every morning that Caesar walked from his neighborhood to the Forum, he was making a statement. He was saying, "I am not them. I am one of you." It was, historians argue, the most calculated political act of his entire career. The Roman Forum was the arena where Julius Caesar fought the most important battles of his life, not with swords, with words, with law, with the terrifying machinery of Roman politics. Look at this AI reconstruction of the Forum in 44 BC. See the rostra, that raised platform in the center. decorated with the iron rams of ships captured in ancient naval battles. Caesar had stood there more times than anyone could count, turning a crowd of 10,000 Romans to his will with nothing but his voice. But by 44 BC, something had shifted in this space, and it had created the conflict that would kill him. Caesar had placed a golden statue of himself in the Forum, a living man among the gods. It was a provocation that could not be ignored. The old families of Rome, the senators who had governed the Republic for 500 years, looked at that statue and saw everything they feared: a king, a tyrant, a man who had decided that the rules that applied to everyone else did not apply to him. They weren't entirely wrong. Caesar had made himself dictator perpetuo, dictator for life. He controlled the army, the courts, the treasury, and the calendar itself. He had literally renamed a month after himself, July, Julius. And every morning he walked through this forum, past that golden statue, past the temples and the rostra, in the faces of men who smiled at him, while their minds worked furiously on the question of how to stop him. Every morning was a kind of dare. The conflict between Caesar and the Senate was not really about the Republic. It was about a more fundamental question. Can one man become so powerful that the city itself cannot survive him? Somewhere in the weeks before March 15th, in the colonnaded villas of the Palatine Hill, in garden courtyards where no slaves could overhear, a group of senators was making the most dangerous decision in Roman history. 23 men. That was the size of the conspiracy that Brutus and Cassius had assembled. 23 men who had decided that Julius Caesar had to die. The risks they were taking were almost incomprehensible. Caesar had supporters throughout the city, among the people, in the army, in the courts. If a single conspirator talked, if a single letter was intercepted, they would all be dead before morning. And here is the tension that drives the entire story. At least two people outside the conspiracy knew what was being planned, and neither of them managed to warn Caesar in time. A man named Artemidorus, a teacher who moved in Caesar's social circles, had somehow learned the names of the conspirators. He wrote them down on a scroll and pushed it into Caesar's hands as he walked to the Senate that morning. Caesar took the scroll, started to read it, and was immediately pulled into conversation by another senator. He never finished reading it. The scroll was still in his hand when he was killed. That is the knife edge this entire city was balanced on. One scroll, one moment of distraction, and history turned. Plutarch, writing about these meetings 50 years after they happened, captured the weight of what was being decided in those closed rooms. He described Brutus as a man who could not sleep, who walked the streets at night, who felt the full gravity of what he was about to do. His wife, Portia, seeing that he was very thoughtful and that he kept silence, came to him and began to inquire of him. Plutarch, Life of Brutus. That image has stayed with historians for 2,000 years. A man who believed he was saving Rome, lying awake in the dark, while the city outside his window went about its business without knowing it was about to change forever. Before we follow Caesar into the final days, let's walk the city he knew. Not the ruins you visit today, the real thing, the Forum Romanum, the center of the world. Caesar crossed it every morning like a man who owned it. The Circus Maximus, where 250,000 Romans felt the city's pulse. The Theater of Pompey, the largest building in Rome, named for his greatest rival. He would die inside it. This was his city. Every stone knew his name. And the city was changing. The Forum Iulium, rising just north of the old Forum. On one side, the modest Rome of the Republic. On the other, Caesar's Rome, built for an empire that answered to one man. On March 15th, 44 BC, he walked into the theater of Pompey and never walked out. 23 blades. The conspirators expected cheers. They found silence. Augustus finished everything Caesar started. Rome became marble. The Suburra where he was born. Still dark, still loud, unchanged. Sometimes I think about that scroll, the one with the names, the one he never finished reading. One moment of distraction, and the entire city turned. These stones are still here, still telling the same story.